The power went out at 3:47 in the morning, and Marshal Decker Reed didn't think much of it. He was already awake, had been for an hour, sitting on his porch with a mug of coffee, gone cold, listening to the kind of nothing that a small frontier settlement sounds like when everyone in it is asleep. Covenant Station was 300 colonists on a rock that barely qualified as a moon. Red dirt streets. Prefab housing stacked in terraces up the hillside. One bar, one medical bay, one freight depot that saw a supply ship maybe twice a season, and one marshal, which was him. Decker Reed, 6'3", 41 years old. Like something that had been through a lot, and was still standing, because it hadn't figured out how to stop. When the grid dropped, he set down his mug, listened to the darkness for a moment, and then walked inside to find his boots. By the time he'd laced them, his comm was already buzzing. Deputy Yara Oze, her voice an octave higher than usual. Marshal, the comms array is down. Whole grid. Emergency backup isn't responding either. I see that. There's something over the dry lake. People are calling it in from the east terraces. Reed looked through his window at the eastern slope, where a handful of lights, candles, he supposed, flickered in the prefab windows, like something's trying to signal something far away. He couldn't see the dry lake from here. He could see the sky, though, and the sky looked wrong. Not wrong in a way he could name, just wrong in the way that sometimes a dog stops moving and stares at a wall and you think, the dog knows something. I'm going out, he said. Marshal, command is going to want. When command wakes up, tell them I'm going out. He clipped his badge to his belt, an old habit, unnecessary now, but the weight of it was something he trusted. And he walked out into the dark. The settlement was already stirring. People in doorways. A cluster of teenagers on the hill, who'd been awake anyway, doing whatever teenagers did at 4 a.m. on moons with no nightlife, pointing now at the sky, with expressions somewhere between terrified and delighted. Reed walked through them without slowing. He had a reputation for walking through things without slowing. The dry lake was a kilometer east of the settlement perimeter, a flat gray expanse that had been a genuine body of water 100,000 years ago, before this moon's orbit had shifted, and the water had slowly off into space. Nothing grew there. Magnetic anomalies made it a navigation headache. The freight pilots hated it. He was halfway there when he heard the sound. Not a sound exactly, but a pressure, a low thrumming that he felt more in his back teeth than his ears, like the subsonic groan of something enormous settling its weight onto the ground. It stopped. Then there was just wind and the crunch of his boots on red dirt. He found the crater at the edge of the lake bed. Shallow, 80 meters across maybe. The dirt at its edges was scorched in a perfect ring, fused to glass in places, still warm. At the center of the crater was a child. Reed stopped walking. The kid was sitting cross-legged in the dead center of the impact zone, his back to the marshal, apparently studying something in his lap with the absorbed concentration of a person who had nowhere else to be. He was small. 7 or 8 years old maybe, hard to tell. He was wearing something that wasn't quite a suit and wasn't quite clothing, some kind of silver-gray material that moved slightly even in still air like it was breathing on its own. He had pale hair, very pale, almost white. Reed walked the rest of the way to the crater's edge and stood there. Hey, he said. The kid looked up. His eyes were large, not unnaturally large, but the kind of large that belongs to children who haven't learned yet not to look directly at things. He studied Reed for a long moment with an expression of complete calm. Your settlement's power grid is down, the kid said. His voice was flat and precise, with an accent that belonged to nowhere. I apologize. The calibration was off. Reed looked at the scorched ring around the crater. He looked at the glassy fused dirt. He looked at the sky, which was dark and clear and had nothing in it. What calibration, he said. Entry. The density differential between orbital approach and surface atmosphere was greater than my instruments projected. The kid reached into a fold of his suit and produced a device. Something small and angular and absolutely not manufactured anywhere in human space, and examined it with a slight frown. Also, my instruments may be slightly damaged. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down on the edge of the crater, which brought him to roughly eye level with the kid. What's your name? My designation is H725. That's not a name. The kid considered this with what seemed like genuine interest. No, I suppose it is not. Kind uses names differently. Humans. H725 said the word carefully, as though it was one he had studied but not yet had occasion to use out loud. I have been studying your broadcasts for 11 of your years. The linguistics are complex. The emotional subtext is considerably more complex. He looked at Reed with those large, calm eyes. You are the settlement authority figure. Your heart rate is elevated but controlled. You are not frightened. I'm a little frightened. Yes. You are controlling it very well. Reed looked at the scorched dirt, the fused glass, the device in the kid's hand. He thought about the power grid. He thought about Deputy O.C., probably going out of her mind by now. He thought about the 40 years of human expansion across 14 colony systems. The treaties with 3 non-hostile species, the wars with 2 others, and the standing protocol for unclassified first contact situations. He was fairly certain involved a lot of documentation he did not currently have access to. Are you dangerous? He asked. 725 looked surprised. It was the first crack in his composure. To you, no, not intentionally. A small pause. Not at all, actually. I am a surveyor. I study emergent civilizations. He looked at the device in his hand. I am supposed to do this without being observed. You crashed into a crater in the middle of my settlement. Yes, the kid said. A longer pause. That was not the plan. Reed took him in. He didn't know what else to do. The kid was 8 years old, or appeared to be, or was performing 8 years old in the same way he performed everything else. With complete calm and an eerie precision. He'd leave him in the crater. He couldn't call it in, because the comms were still down. He couldn't exactly arrest him. So he walked him back to the settlement, and H725 walked beside him, with his hands clasped behind his back like a very small professor, taking a stroll, and they talked. How far did you come? In your measurement units, approximately 42 light years. That's a long way. The journey itself is brief. The subjective experience of transit is approximately. H725 paused. It is difficult to describe. There is a moment of compression, then arrival. He glanced up at Reed. Your species has not achieved this technology yet. Not yet. You are close. Closer than you know. Something shifted in the kid's expression. Not quite admiration, but something in its neighborhood. Civilization's rate of technological adaptation is considered remarkable. In academic circles, among surveying institutions, we're famous. An anomaly. H725 said it completely without condescension, the way you'd say a physical fact about a river or a star. Most emergent civilizations plateau. Your kind accelerates. He looked at the sky. It is one reason I was assigned to observe you. What's the other reason? A small silence. We are not certain what you will do, H725 said. With the acceleration, with all of it. Most of our models suggest. He stopped. Suggest what? That you will either destroy yourselves or become something we do not currently have a category for. Reed walked. Gravel under his boots. The settlement lights ahead, candles still flickering in windows. And your job is to figure out which. My job is to observe. Conclusions are for others. But the kid was looking at him sideways, with an expression that for the first time seemed to contain something other than analysis. Though I will say, preliminary observation suggests your civilization contains a great deal of what my culture would call. He paused, searching. Stubbornness. Reed almost smiled. That's one word for it. The powers came back on at dawn. By then, Reed had H725 installed in his back room with a blanket and a bowl of reconstituted oatmeal that the kid examined with extreme academic interest before eating all of it. Reed sat at his kitchen table and drank fresh coffee and tried to figure out what exactly he was doing. The answer he kept arriving at was the same thing he always did, keeping order, keeping people safe. That was the job. It didn't stop being the job because the situation was unprecedented. The comms came back with the power, which meant that 15 minutes after dawn, his comm was screaming. The screamer was a man named Captain Hollis Vane, military intelligence liaison for the outer colony systems, who had apparently been awake for 6 hours, and was in a mood that Reed recognized as the mood of a man who had smelled an opportunity and was afraid someone else was going to get to it first. Marshal Reed, I understand you made contact with the unidentified entity. I found a kid in a crater. The entity has been classified as a priority intelligence asset. I am ordering immediate transfer of custody. He's not in custody. A pause. Is he eating breakfast? A longer pause. Marcius is a direct military order. You will secure the entity and hold it for collection by my team. We have a frigate en route. Estimated arrival, 6 hours. Reed looked across the kitchen at the closed back room door. He could hear, faintly, the kid moving around in there, probably examining every object in the room with the same absorbed focus he'd given the oatmeal. I'll take that under advisement, Reed said, and ended the call. He sat for a moment. Then he went to fill his coffee, and knocked on the back room door, and said, "When do your people come to pick you up?" The door opened. H725 stood in the doorway with a datapad in his hand, Reed's datapad, which he appeared to have disassembled, improved in some way, and reassembled. My extraction window is in approximately 31 hours. Someone from the military is going to be here in 6. H725 processed this. That is a problem. Yeah. Reed took a drink of coffee. Tell me about this weapon your people think you've got. Another surprise, crack in the composure. I do not have a weapon. The military thinks you do. Something that caused the blackout, the electromagnetic effects. My survey instrument. Kid held up the angular device. It is a field modulator. It calibrates the local electromagnetic environment for observation purposes. It is not designed as a weapon. A small pause, though it would be effective as one in untrained hands. As the power outage demonstrated, he looked at the device with something like chagrin. And when Vane's team takes it apart to figure out how it works, H725 was quiet for a moment. Then, they would not be able to replicate the technology. They lack the manufacturing capacity by perhaps 3 centuries. But, in attempting to understand it, they would cause several high-probability secondary effects. He paused. Significant ones, like, the detonation radius would encompass your entire settlement. Reed set down his coffee cup very carefully. That, he said, is information I needed earlier. I did not anticipate military involvement at this response velocity. They smelled something valuable. Reed stood. He went to the window, looked out at the morning street, where people were moving now, normal colony morning traffic, completely unaware that they were 31 hours away from either fine or dead, depending on how the next 6 hours went. Okay, he said. New plan. Tish. He spent 2 hours getting ready, and spent them the way he always spent time that needed to be spent carefully, by doing one thing at a time and not thinking about the next thing until the current thing was done. He sent Osi home, told her there was a routine colonial affairs review and he'd need the office cleared. She gave him the look she always gave him when she thought he was protecting her from something, which he was, but she went. He walked through the settlement and talked to 8 people he trusted. Old Brennan, been bounced out of the colonial service for reasons that had never been fully explained and knew more about military operations than anyone who wasn't supposed to. The Vasquez sisters, who ran the freight depot and had a working relationship with 3 different smuggling networks out of pure economic necessity. A 17-year-old named Cord, who was the best systems tech on the station, and thought rules were suggestions made by people with insufficient imagination. He did not tell any of them everything. He told each of them enough. Then he went back to H725, who had spent the 2 hours, either sleeping or performing a very convincing impression of it, and was now sitting up on the cot looking at Reed with those large assessing eyes. You have a plan, the kid said. I've got the beginning of one. The military team is experienced. Captain Vane's dossier, H725 glanced at the upgraded datapad. Indicates 17 successful operations, 3 of them rated as high complexity. He will anticipate evasion. Let him. The kid tilted his head slightly. You want him to think you are evading. I want him to think whatever keeps his attention on me and off the things I actually need him to not notice. Reed checked his badge again. That old habit, the weight of it. I've been doing this job for 16 years. People come into this settlement looking for something that doesn't belong to them. I've got a pretty good system. H725 looked at him for a long moment. Marshal Reed, he said, I have observed 12 emergent civilizations in my survey career. I have spent 11 years studying yours from a distance. A pause. You are precisely what the anomaly would predict. Is that good? I believe so. Something moved in the kid's face. Something that On a human child, Reed would have called the beginning of trust. Yes, I believe so. Vane's frigate arrived in 5 hours and 40 minutes. 20 minutes early, which told Reed everything he needed to know about how the captain operated. Reed met them at the landing pad. Him and Brennan was a large and unimpressive-looking man. Until you'd seen him in situations that called for something other than looking impressive, and then he was something else entirely. They stood on the pad and watched the frigate's ramp lower and Vane walk down it with 11 soldiers at his back. Vane was compact and clean-shaven and moved with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been told no by someone who meant it. He looked at Reed, took in the badge, took in the size of him, and did the thing people did when they looked at Reed and decided they were looking at a problem they could manage. Marshal Reed, Captain Hollis Vane, where is the entity? Medical Bay. Reed said it the way he said everything. Flat. Performance. The kid was disoriented after landing. My medics checking him over. Our medics are welcome to observe once my medic's done. Shouldn't be long. He held Vane's gaze. This is my settlement, Captain. I run a careful shop. Vane's expression did the thing that ambitious men's expressions did when they were recalibrating. Of course. He gestured to 2 of his soldiers. My team will wait with the entity. My medic doesn't work well with observers. Old thing she has. I'll bring the kids out when she's done. Reed looked past Vane at the soldiers. 11. He counted them twice from habit. Your people want coffee? Long flight. 3 of them wanted coffee. He'd expected that. He'd asked Cord to handle the coffee station. Put Cord close to the frigate's landing systems, which was the point. Vane was smarter than that, though. He left 4 soldiers at the frigate and brought the rest with him toward the medical bay, which meant Reed needed to stall him for 12 minutes. The amount of time Cord had said it would take. He did it by showing Vane his filing system. It was the most boring thing he could think of. 16 years of incident reports, supply logs, communications with Colonial Command, all of it organized in a way that looked chaotic and was actually precisely organized, and explaining it to someone took exactly as long as you needed it to, because the person explaining controlled the pace. Vane lasted 9 minutes before his patience cracked. Enough. Take me to the medical bay. Sure, Reed said. His comm buzzed once. That was Cord. Actually, Reed said, the kid's ready. Let me bring him out. He walked out of the office with Vane 2 steps behind him, walked across the settlement's central square. Morning traffic around them, people going about their lives, completely normal, and knocked on the door of the freight depot. Yara Osei opened it. You, Vane said behind Reed, in the tone of a man realizing he has been managed. You sent your deputy. She went home, Reed said. Then she came back. People do that. He looked at Osei. Is everything done? She said. What did she do? Vane's voice had gone very controlled. What did you move? Is the entity. The kid, Reed said, asked me to pass something along. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced the field modulator. He set it on the nearest flat surface, a crate in the depot doorway, and stepped back from it. Vane stared at it, then at Reed. That device, he wanted you to have it. Reed's voice was level. He said, the survey is complete, the instrument has fulfilled its purpose, and he wished the captain a productive career. He paused. I'm paraphrasing. Where is the entity? Reed looked up at the sky, clear. Blue-gray. Color it always was. Nothing in it. 30 hours ahead of schedule, he said. Turns out, there was an extraction window. You just have to know how to ask. Vane stared at the sky for a long moment, then at the device, then at Reed, who was looking back at him with an expression of absolute cooperative calm that contained, very far below the surface, something that was not cooperative at all. You realize, Vane said quietly, that I have authority to detain you, charge you with obstruction of military operations. 2. Yes, sir. Reed reached up and touched his badge, the old habit, the weight of it. You can start the paperwork whenever you're ready. My office is right there. A pause. You want that coffee now? 3 days later, when the matter was still being screamed about at levels well above Reed's pay grade, he went out at dawn to the dry lake and sat on the crater's edge. The scorched ring was still there. The fused glass caught the early light and threw it back in small cold sparks. He sat with his coffee and thought about what the kid had said, that humans were an anomaly, that they either destroyed themselves or became something new. that the stubbornness was remarkable, cheat, and the rate of adaptation, and the way they kept walking toward things, in the dark, instead of away from them. He thought about the 12 minutes Cord had needed, and about Brennan's quiet conversation with Vane's soldiers at the coffee station, and about Ozzy's face when she'd opened the depot door. Proud, trying not to show it, showing it anyway. He thought about 300 people going about their morning, completely unaware that anything had happened. He thought about H725, sitting cross-legged in a crater at 4 a.m., studying something in his lap, with the focused calm of a person who had nowhere else to be. He hadn't said goodbye exactly. When the extraction window came, manufactured by Cord, field modulators, own signal inverted and used as a beacon, a thing that should not have worked and had anyway, H725 had looked at Reed across the dusty depot floor with those large assessing eyes, and something had moved in his face, the thing that on a human child would have been called affection. And he had said, very precisely, "You are exactly what the models cannot account for." Reed had said, "Is that right?" And the kid had said, "It is the most interesting finding of my career." And then he was gone. Reed finished his coffee. The sun was coming up properly now, painting the dry lake orange and red. All that ancient, empty waterbed glowing like something that remembered what it used to be. From the settlement behind him, he could hear the sounds of morning. The freight depot opening, the bar starting its generator, somewhere a kid laughing at something. He should write up his report. He would write it in a way that said everything true, and implied nothing interesting. He was good at that. He stood and brushed dirt from his knees and walked back toward the settlement. Above him, the sky was clear. Probably empty, probably. He touched his badge out of habit and kept walking. 6 weeks later, there was a box on his doorstep, no courier. No shipping manifest, no return address. Just a small flat box made of something that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite ceramic, sealed with a fastening mechanism he'd never seen before, sitting on his porch like it had always been there. Inside was a device, not the field modulator. That was presumably still a Churchy lab being not understood of some degree by people who were very frustrated about it. This was something different, smaller. Flat and smooth, the same silver gray of H725's suit. There was a note with it, printed on paper. Actual paper. Which meant someone had gone to some effort, in careful block letters, for your kind of stubbornness. And below that, in smaller letters, the calibration is correct this time. Reed looked at the device for a long time. Then he set it on his kitchen table, and went to make coffee and stood in his kitchen, thinking about anomalies and the things that could not be accounted for. He thought about a 7-year-old sitting in a crater perfectly calm, studying the thing in his lap. He thought about his own hands, which were large and scarred, and had been in a lot of situations they shouldn't have been in, and had kept moving, anyway. He thought about what it meant to be observed and found remarkable. Then he picked up the device and carried it to Cord's place, because Cord was the best systems tech on the station, and thought rules were suggestions. And if anyone could figure out what it did, Cord could. And that seemed like the kind of step you took. One thing at a time, without thinking about the next thing. Moving toward instead of away. That was the job. That was apparently the anomaly. Outside, the dry lake caught the light. They didn't find out what the device did for another 4 months. Cord worked on it slowly and carefully, which was unusual for Cord, who normally worked on things the way water worked on stone. Fast and without apparent plan, and then suddenly through. She was careful with this one. Reed thought she understood without being told. That careful was the right speed. When she figured it out, she came to his office at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, which was a slow day, and sat down across from his desk and looked at him for a moment before speaking. "It's a communicator," she said. Reed waited. "Not for radio. Not for anything we've got infrastructure for." She set it on his desk. "It connects to whatever network they use. Long range. Real long range." She looked at him. 42 light years kind of long range. Reed looked at the device. "So if someone out there wanted to talk to us," he said, "they could. And if we wanted to talk back, we could." Cord paused. "Reed, do you know what this is? This is first contact infrastructure. This is a direct line to an interstellar civilization that's been watching us for 11 years, and apparently, Decided. She stopped, started again. Apparently decided we were worth talking to. Reed looked at the device for a long time. Then he said, "Can you make it work without blowing out the grid this time?" Cord made the face she made when the answer was yes, but she wanted a moment to appreciate the question. Probably. Then let's find out what they want to say. He picked up the device. It was warm in his hand. Not warm like electronics, warm like something that had been waiting. He looked at Cord, who was looking back at him with an expression that contained everything at once. Fear, excitement, particular alertness of a person standing at the edge of something enormous. "Ready," he said. She said, "When have I ever not been?" He pressed what appeared to be the activation point, and the device made a sound that wasn't quite a sound. That pressure in the back teeth again, and then was quiet. Then from somewhere, or from everywhere, or from 42 light years away traveling by methods that would take humanity 3 centuries to reproduce, a voice said, "Marshal Reed, this is H725, survey complete. Submitting recommendation for formal contact." Leaned back in his chair. Outside, the settlement was doing what it always did. Moving, making noise, getting on with it. 300 people on a red dirt moon, going about their lives completely unaware. "What's the recommendation?" he asked. A small pause. Particular pause of a very precise person choosing words with care. "That you are exactly as strange as we hoped," said H725. "And that we would very much like to know what you do next." Reed looked out his window at the dry lake, glowing in the noon light. All that ancient empty bed full of nothing but the memory of water and the fact of the sun. "Yeah," he said. "Used to.